Max. Max has been quite busy. Max has been very, very busy. Let's catch up with him, shall we? Let's catch up with him, shall we?
When I think of mead, I think of that sweet golden colored drink that is often associated with the Vikings. But that is by far not the only type of mead out there. Like in medieval France, people would risk third-degree burns to create a dark, almost black mead known as Bochet. So thank you to Factor for sponsoring this video as I make the black mead of 14th century France.
Damn!
This time on Tasting History.
Okay. Interesting. Interesting. I wonder how this is gonna go.
So I've made mead here on the channel before, way back in 2020.
I remember this video, yes.
Began. But it was a 13th century mead that was rather simple. Delicious, but simple.
Right.
But mead is often not simple. It can become very complex with different flavors added from herbs and spices and different flours.
Okay.
And then there is a mead called Bochet.
Bochet.
And it gets its flavor and color from caramelizing or even burning honey. The recipe comes from Le Ménagier de Paris, which was a guidebook written by an older gentleman in Paris in 1393.
1300s? Holy moly.
His young wife how to run a household. And there's one section of the book that is filled with different remedies for when somebody gets sick. And that's actually where this recipe is found, in beverages for the sick. So the recipe begins to make 6 sextiers of Bochet, take 6 pints of very sweet honey and put it in a cauldron on the fire and boil it. And stir for so long that it starts to grow, and you see that it also boils and bubbles like small blisters which will burst, releasing a little bit of dark smoke. Then add 7 sextiers
Why would I have to use
of water
that phrasing for that,
so
though?
much that it reduces to 6 sextiers and keep stirring. And then put it in a vat to cool until it is lukewarm. Then strain it through a cloth and put it in a barrel and add a pint of yeast from ale, because
that's a lot.
is what makes it
That's a lot.
Though if you use bread yeast, it makes as good a flavor, but the color will be duller. And cover well and warmly so it ferments. So that is his basic recipe for what he calls Bochet. Though there are numerous spellings of that word that you can find in other medieval manuscripts.
That's a lot of different spellings,
Though unfortunately, since he wrote this in 1393, he does use an archaic form of measurement known as a sextier, sometimes a septier, even though sex and sept mean two different things.
I was about to say two entirely different things.
And that word also has lots and lots of other spellings throughout the centuries. And
linguistics.
Spellings,
why are you so crazy?
Different quantities.
Why are you so crazy?
The amount that a sextier is varies wildly from century to century, and even from location to location.
Even location to location? What?
The pint is a little more consistent throughout history. So we are able to kind of guess exactly what he's talking about, especially because we do know a bit more about what this quantity would have been in Paris at the time. It's not perfect, but the ratios should end up being about right. And since I'm cutting this way down anyway, the ratio is all that matters, because this recipe makes a vat.
A vat of Bochet. Yeah.
I don't have a vat, so I'm making a much smaller amount. So for
Max, you should get a vat.
I am using 1 pint of honey, 1 gallon plus 2 cups of distilled water, and 5 grams of dried ale yeast. You can also add a few grams of yeast nutrient if you want. It's not absolutely necessary, but it does kind of help speed up the process.
It sure does.
Ideally, what you're actually using is ale barm. But unless you've been brewing some medieval ale, you're not going to have
any of that. Nah.
I have not been brewing any medieval ale, though I do want to do that.
Oh, hell yeah, let's go.
Kitchen again. This is actually the last recipe that I made in my kitchen before they tore everything out. It's kind of being redone. So I haven't been cooking.
New kitchen for Max. Let's go.
And I've really been relying on meals from today's sponsor, Factor. I often make HelloFresh meals. Use a pot that is so much...
Hang on.
Actually, we're going to begin with the pot that you're going to heat the honey in. Use a pot that is so much bigger than you
I heard myself loudly say once because I hit the twist. Nice.
Gloves and long sleeves at the
yeah, you're going to want some protection for this, chat.
The burning honey does sputter a lot, and when you get it on
ranged
your skin,
attacks, very powerful ranged attacks in this one.
Before you add the honey to the pot, you're going to add a gallon of water to the pot, and use either a ruler or at least a spoon to measure how high that water comes up. And use either a ruler or at least a spoon to measure how high that water comes up. because that's the amount of liquid that we want at the very end of the process after everything reduces. So you can tell how much you need in there after everything reduces. So add the honey to a very large pot and then set it over medium heat and let it slowly warm up. After just a minute or two, it'll go from thick and viscous to a more liquidy consistency.
Yep.
And after a couple more minutes, you'll start to see bubbles around the edge of the pot. And once that happens, you want to start
because burning sugar absolutely, it's culinary. They call it culinary napalm for a reason, chat. It burns like hell, and it not just burns, it sticks to your skin, right? It's really, really bad. You have to be incredibly careful when making caramel or like cooking sugar at all. Any sugar, be it regular sugar, brown sugar, honey. It's very dangerous. You have to be very, very exceedingly careful with this shit. All right? I'm telling you from experience, please be very, very careful.
Pretty much the whole time for the next 15 minutes or so. So save your strength. Another minute in and the honey will start to create a foam across the top.
I worked in a bakery for a year, made caramel sauce with heavy cream nearly every day, and I still have scars. Oh, God, bird, yeah.
Keep an eye on the temperature
Yikes,
and make sure that the honey doesn't foam
Oh, good Lord.
too much. But the honey will foam up some, and you want to keep it bubbling. So to keep the foam down, just keep stirring and making sure to scrape the sides so nothing burns.
Yep.
At about 6 minutes in, you should start to see the honey begin to darken, and large bubbles will start coming to the surface.
Yep.
Now, in many modern forms of Bochet, this is actually where you stop. It's just starting to caramelize, and now you'll have a lovely, light, caramelly flavored Bochet. But the 14th century recipe is pretty specific.
We need to take it a bit further than this.
So we're going to
we need to take it a bit further than
this. Let it keep boiling, and eventually the
like
honey will start to
super
steam
dark.
And even let off a little smoke.
Yeah,
but
see, like
look, stirring,
look.
It will not be burned, just toasty. As you approach 10 to 12 minutes,
here's where it gets dangerous. Here's where it gets dangerous, chat. Here's where it starts sputtering a bit. This is where it's going to start throwing molten hot sugar all over the place. Here's where you need to be turbo careful.
Large bubbles will swell and burst, letting off dark steam. This is what you're looking for. This is what the recipe calls for. It says that they're like blisters bursting, which is gross to use in a recipe.
But accurate.
That's what they call it.
But accurate.
And this is also where the recipe gets really quite dangerous. So again, long sleeves, gloves. Be careful and do not look over the pot. Please, you will lose an eye. Because you are about to add the water, and the boiling honey will sputter and shoot up, and hot steam will fill the whole area. When I did this, there ended up being honey kind of just all over the wall and everything near it. It was a little crazy. And luckily, they came in the next day to redo the kitchen, so I didn't even have to clean it. So continue to slowly add the water.
That's dangerous right there, chat. Good God.
And the honey will actually harden. And that's okay.
That's super dangerous.
Leave it on the heat for a few minutes, and as it heats back up, the honey will dissolve again. You want to bring the Bochet up to a gentle boil.
Yeah,
and
dumping water directly into boiling sugar is
that gallon mark. That's why it's important to measure the gallon before you start this process. For me, it took about 40 or 45 minutes for it to reduce that much, but just keep an eye on it. Once it's reduced, take it off the heat and set it aside.
Haven't told you my horror story from my last job. Oh no, Comey.
Just like slightly warm, but no more than 120 degrees Fahrenheit. Then pour it into a vessel for fermenting, and you want to strain it through a sieve, or you can get a funnel like mine that has a sieve built into it. And as it continues to cool, you can mix your yeast with just a few tablespoons of water to waken it up, and then add that to the Bochet. And again, make sure it is no hotter than 120 degrees Fahrenheit.
Because you don't want to kill the yeast immediately. No.
And then all of your work was for naught. Now, technically, this is the end of kind of what you need to do.
Imagine the remodelers coming in and seeing dark, hardened spots all over the kitchen and just being like, what the hell is all this? Oh, it's just my 14th century mead. Don't worry about it. Not a pretty story. I'll tell you after stream. Go right ahead, Comey. Go right ahead. Thank you, Tapper. Don't kill the yeasty boys. They're working very hard.
But there is a second optional part in the 14th century recipe that I am going to do. And that says, if you want to make it very good, add an ounce of ginger, long pepper, grains of
here's where you
paradise,
add the
and
spices.
cloves
Yes.
in amounts, except for the cloves.
Worst burn I've had is an oven door swinging closed on my arm.
And when it has been 2 or 3 days and the Bochet smells
that sucks.
strong enough,
Yikes,
take out the bag and
yikes.
wring it out and put it in the next barrel that you make. And so this powder will serve you well up to 3 or 4 times. And this is not uncommon to add spices. Most old mead recipes, whether it's Bochet or any other kind of mead,
they actually do add spices to the mead. Yes,
so for this, you want 5 grams of ginger, 5 grams of long pepper, 5 grams grains of paradise, and 2 grams of cloves.
Okay.
And you really want dried whole spices for this, nothing that is pre-ground. You want to give them just a slight grinding.
No worries, King Frank. You have a wonderful day at work. Have a good rest of your day.
If you don't have long pepper or grains of paradise, I suggest you get some. I'll put links in the description.
Grains of paradise are really nice.
They're wonderful.
Very,
very
nice.
popular in medieval Europe, and they're both types of pepper, but they're so much more complex.
They're
than
very
the
much more
black pepper
complex
that we
than
have
that. Yeah.
Today, long pepper came from India typically, and grains of paradise from Africa. You can still get it online or at some specialty.
My stomach just growled right now, chat. I don't know if you could hear that, but yo. Apparently, I'm hungrier than I thought. Holy shit.
Shops, and they're just fun. So I'm going to crush these up just slightly, but not into a fine powder, just enough to break them open, and then mix them all together and set them in a piece of finely woven cloth like muslin, and tie it into a sachet with a good length of string left for it to dangle. Now I'm adding one more ingredient, which isn't technically mentioned.
You don't have
in the
grace powder. You
recipe,
could buy it. That's how stores work. Thank you.
And that is wood chips.
What?
Now they wouldn't have had wood chips. They would have.
Max, you want to run that by me again? I'm sorry. What? Hold on, fam. What? You want to run that by me again? Hold on.
Had wooden barrels. This was typically fermented in a wooden barrel. But I'm using a glass jar to ferment, so I'm not going to get any of
You know, okay, that actually does make sense. Hold on. No. That actually does make sense. That actually does make sense, because if they would ferment this in a wooden barrel, it's actually extracting some flavor profiles from the inside walls of the wooden barrel. Okay, no. All right, never mind. This makes sense. Okay, continue. This makes sense, chat. This makes sense.
that flavor from the wood. But many places today that specialize in brewing or making wine do have wood chips that you can add to add that flavor. So I'm using some wood chips. So add those and the sachet of spices to the mead, and then put on a lid with a bubble airlock on top.
Yep.
Again, they would not have had this in medieval Europe. They would have instead either just left it open or put some straw or cloth over it to keep the buggies out. But it's not really the best way to do fermenting, not the safest way to do fermenting.
No.
So I do recommend the airlock, and then you just put a little water in there and it keeps everything out nice and safe, but it lets out the gases.
Lets out the gases for fermentation. Yeah.
Completely close this off, or it will.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear that, Sharon.
So you need the bubbler. Then you're going to set this in a dark place in the house and let it sit for 2 to 3 days. Then take out the sachet of spices. And let that go for another month or so. You'll know that it starts fermenting when the bubbles start coming up to the top and you can actually hear them. And you'll know that it's done fermenting when you can't hear the bubbles anymore. So mine took about a month. Which
I've seen the videos about the guy that turned Mountain Dew into wine. I've seen that doc, yes.
For me to tell you a little bit more.
Cooking stream when? I'm working on it, Soul. Believe it or not, I am working on it. I just need a good setup.
So I was actually hesitant to do another video on mead because I kind of thought, well, I've covered it. I've trod
Hope you're doing well. Hope you're doing well.
But 4 years after making that video, which really focused on mead in the
Scandinavian
and mythical world, I realized there is a lot more to talk about.
There's way more to talk about.
Let us start,
especially with Bochet.
Poland.
Yeah.
Poland has a long history of beekeeping. So it's only natural
that
they also have a long history of mead making. All the way back in 996, a diplomat and traveler from Cordoba, Ibrahim ibn Yakub, visited the court of Poland's first historic ruler, Mieszko I, and he said that besides food, meat, and land for plowing, the country of Mieszko I abounds in mead.
In
which
mead.
is what the Slavic
Now I want
wines and
mead,
intoxicating
chat. Oh my
drinks are
God.
called.
Now I want
For centuries,
mead.
mead was a centerpiece of Polish exports. The Poles
Trying to
and the
consistently
Rus
stream just
made
finished, actually. It's been a
exquisite
while.
mead
I
that was prized
noticed.
above
You've been
all
sharing
others
your
in the
streams
region.
on the
In
Discord,
his
so I appreciate
1584
that.
poem,
Yeah.
Roxalania, the Polish poet
Very fun.
Sebastian Klonowicz praises the wines of Italy, but says that they can't hold a candle to the sweet and
Not the
heavenly
bees, like
nectar
that,
is mead. Earth proffers
like that who
wine
clip
from the
was
rich
once my cell
moisture of
phone
the dirt. Jove
ringtone.
himself
Made it
in
awkward. I got a
heaven
notification on my phone. It was in
distills
front of the
our
training class. I wasn't.
Bacchus
Oh
is the
no,
author of the
Akido.
vineyard, Jupiter of honey.
Oh.
For if wine is born of the earth, then mead is born of heaven.
Ah.
None can deny it to be a dew celestial.
Yeah.
There were
I
several
want some
types of
fucking
mead that were
mead now,
made in
chat.
the
God
region,
damn it.
and the most expensive, the most prized, was a mead made without adding any water at all. The
What?
only thing was honey, and then sometimes they would add the juice of cherries or different berries. And then they would seal
Interesting.
it up, bury it, and let it ferment naturally for anywhere from 10 to 50 years.
What?
This type of
That's
mead was so
crazy.
precious that by the 15th century, Duke
What the
Janusz III
fuck?
of Mazovia restricted its consumption to the upper classes.
That's
So because
wild.
this mead was so expensive, it was usually
Somehow
only
it still
the
work
upper
here
classes
despite
who
that.
could even afford it. So restricting it to them kind of seems unnecessary. They're
yeah.
the only ones who could buy it. And mead in Eastern Europe at this time,
I
really
bet that's some
does
good. Yeah,
seem to be
taking
mostly
50
associated
years to
with
ferment. Can you
royalty
imagine?
Specifically.
Good
Perhaps
God.
my favorite mead-loving royal was the 10th century Princess Olga of Kiev, later to become Saint Olga. Though her mead drinking takes place during one of her less saintly moments. Her
moments.
husband, Prince Igor, had just been murdered by the Drevlians.
Oh, no.
And she was upset. Olga was mad, and that makes sense. So
Bro, the
she
grandkids
sends
gonna
a
love
note
this
to
shit,
the
right,
Drevlians
Akido? Yeah.
saying that they must prepare great quantities of mead in the city where you killed my husband, that I may weep over his grave and hold a funeral feast for him. It
You know what?
seems
Fair.
sweet.
Yeah, fair.
Let me tell you, do not mess with Olga, because she shared this mead with the Drevlians, and when they got sufficiently drunk, she had them all massacred.
Damn!
And this was only following her burning a bunch of them alive in a bathhouse
What the
while
fuck?
she stood outside taunting them.
Holy shit! Imagine getting your enemies so drunk they can't even defend themselves, and then you just go to town. Wow. Wow. Holy shit. That is 10 out of 10. 10 out of 10. I have to applaud that planning. That's amazing. Get you a woman like that. Damn. Yeah, they're drunk enough. We should burn them. They should burn nice and good now. Holy fuck. 10 out of 10 planning. My God. My God.
Don't make saints like that anymore. And she wanted this mead so that she could drink it as she mourned the loss of her husband, Prince Igor. And that does seem fairly common in this period in Eastern Europe. In fact, in the 9th century,
can we stop cooking yourself?
visited the land that is now Serbia, and he wrote that they too drank
Absolutely
mead on the
insane.
occasion of
Holy
someone's
shit.
death. And when a year has passed since the death, they take 20 jugs of mead, or more or less, and go with it to that hill. The family of the deceased gathers, they eat
Saint
and drink
air
there,
quotes.
and then they go their separate ways. But mead wasn't only drunk during times of sorrow, but also times of celebration for festivals and weddings and
You know,
all
when you
sorts of
murder your
happy
enemies.
events. And when you
Yeah.
move further west, it was the same case, but sometimes they used it as a form of payment, like in Wales. In the Welsh law code, known as the Laws of Hywelda, codified in the 10th century, it specifies that some people are to be paid in silver, while for others, a mess of food and a hornful of mead he receives from the court for his provision.
Imagine
There are
getting
also
paid with
guidelines
food
for
and
how
mead,
much of
chat.
several different drinks a steward
Imagine
is to
getting
receive
paid
after
in
giving food
instead of
and
like
drink
silver
to the
or
king.
like money.
A
No,
steward
you
has
get
the
paid
length of
with
his
mead
middle
and
finger,
food.
of the
Holy
clear
shit.
ale from off the lees, and the length of the middle joint of the braggot, and the length of the extreme
Red wedding,
joint
but it's an
of
all you
the
can eat
mead.
barbecue.
Braggot or
Damn.
braggot was basically
Damn.
a combination of mead and ale, and while delicious, I'm sure, was not worth the same as just the mead. 2 vats of braggot or 4 of ale are
Interesting.
paid
Okay.
for 1 of mead. The worth of a vat of mead which is paid to the king is 60 pence. 9 handbreadths is the measure of the vat of mead when measured diagonally, that is, from the furthest bottom groove to the hither rim. Kings around this period were enamored with mead because
damn it, it's better than my red wedding joke.
As a form of payment. In England, if the king was to come over, you had to make sure to have an ample supply of mead on hand.
That's true,
In the Life of St. Dunstan, by a cleric simply known as B, he tells the story of King Ethelstan of England, who was coming to stay with a relative, Ethelfleda, at the monastery at Glastonbury. He sends messengers ahead to make sure that she is well supplied for when the king arrives, because it's not just the king. You have to remember, when the king came to visit, it was an honor, but it was
He's got his whole ass entourage with him.
Because he usually traveled with hundreds or even thousands of people.
Man's got a whole ass entourage,
to entertain and feed and supply them all. So it turns out that she had plenty of everything except for meat. And the messengers were like, well, this is not gonna this is not gonna fly. So she starts freaking out, and she goes to pray to Mother Mary for intercession, for some help. And it turns out, once the king gets there, at the feast, they start pouring the mead, and as the mead drains, the pitchers refill themselves. So there was never any less than a hand's breadth of mead in the pitchers. Now, this royal love of mead does apply to this era, but also much later. It continues on through the medieval age, even into the Tudor
literally
age,
never-ending supply of mead. Let's go.
Had a favorite mead. Her beekeeper, Charles Butler, wrote a treatise in 1609, several years after her death, called The Feminine Monarchy, or the Treatise Concerning Bees and the Due Ordering of Bees. And he says, one excellent receipt I will here recite, and it is of that which our renowned Queen Elizabeth, of happy memory, did so well like, that she would every year have a vessel of it. The recipe was 1 part honey to 6 parts water, and was flavored with sweet briar leaves, thyme, rosemary, and bay leaves before being fermented. Then cloves and mace were added, and it was aged for 6 months. Sadly, it was not long after this period that the popularity of mead began to wane.
Oh, well, that's unfortunate.
In the 18th century, in Poland and Russia, vodka,
that checks.
And much easier to make,
way easier to make,
had really usurped mead's place. And in England, there were several reasons that it kind of went out of fashion. One was the dissolution of the monasteries by Queen Elizabeth's father, Henry VIII.
Oh, that's unfortunate.
Because most of the beekeeping, and hence mead making in England, was done by monks. So with no monks, you had less honey, and you had less
mead.
Another factor was the addition of adding hops to ale. This allowed the drink to have a longer shelf life while still being rather cheap, which made it more attractive to the average drinker. Now, mead didn't disappear entirely. It just became more of a niche drink. It was very popular amongst like countryside peasants who were making it for themselves because it was
good idea, tapper,
And to them, it was cheaper than wine, which had really become the more prestigious drink to have. Though some people also drank it.
That's why I like honey, 1/4 Polish. That's cool, fetch.
It was often thought to be curative, especially when infused with different herbs and spices,
just like Bochet. There it is,
In fact, there is a 16th century French treatise that talks about
leave it to the French.
curative properties of Bochet, provided it is made properly.
When
the Bochet is
leave it to the French.
And the honey is not well cooked, it bites the belly hard and generates the diarrhea. And makes great suffering. Hold on, what? And scented, it is delectable to the taste, and it smoothens the voice and clears the throat and the pipes of the lungs, and comforts the heart and gives it jubilation. They started adding all sorts of different herbs and spices.
All right, y'all need to work on your phrasing. Jesus.
And they also sometimes would include less desirable ingredients, like shavings of ivory and hartshorn, 3 drams. And that's why I didn't make the 17th century recipe, but
that's wild.
The medieval French recipe from the 14th century, which should be ready to drink.
That's
wild.
After
the mead has fully fermented,
make this wrong and ye be shitting. Exactly, Guilford.
Go ahead and rack it, and basically that is just pouring it into another sterile container and keeping out the dead yeast. Then you can either let it age for a while, or you can drink it as is, which is what I'm going to do right now.
There you go.
And here we are, Bochet.
Ooh, that color though, dang.
It smells caramely.
That color is really nice.
Burn, but not unpleasant. I'm not getting a lot of the spices from the scent, so I'm curious what it's like.
I wonder if you left the spices in longer than just 2 or 3 days. Would that make a difference? Oh, wow.
It's really good. So it's not sweet at all.
Interesting.
It's like mead can be really sweet.
Yeah, it can be.
This isn't sweet at all.
Really?
The spices are just enough.
Ooh, okay.
It's also not as viscous.
I'm very enamored with that color. That color looks really
meads.
nice.
And that's because it has a lot more water than most meads that you have today. Some meads today can have like
super
1
thick.
part mead to 4 parts water, sometimes 3 parts water. This is 6 parts water, 1 part mead. So definitely not as thick, probably not as alcoholic, but that's not the point. It's supposed to be curative, and I don't know about that, but tastes good. So I am going to let this sit and age, and maybe in a few months I'll give another crack at it, give it another taste, and see how it develops. It's actually a lot more complex than most meads that I've had. And it's really good. I was worried that it was going to kind of be bitter.
I was really
because
tempted to try. I'm really tempted to try this.
There was that burnt
make
honey
this
to
myself.
It, but it's mellow. It's
I know
softened,
Golden Hive Mead has
delicious,
done Peeps and Mountain Dew mead.
Yeah,
mostly
great.
as viral
So
content as a
next
brewery
week,
that made
fingers
Peeps
crossed,
Bochet for real.
I'll be
Oh
back in
my
the kitchen.
god, what bird? That's
Randy?
crazy. Also, I do know that channel, yes, the Golden Hive Mead. They I showed this to Christy and she was very concerned because one of Golden Hive's projects, one of his most requested projects is to do Mountain Dew Baja Blast Mead. And like, I showed that to Christy and she was exceedingly concerned. She was very, very concerned. Oh my lord.